As Brother James already mentioned, he's known me all of my life, and there's a few in this audience that fit that bill. It's a bit unusual for me to stand up here and to say that, and there's some that I've grown up with over the years that are a little closer to my age, David being one of those, and several others as well. And so this is a special group in many ways. Appreciate the stand that this group makes in the community. Appreciate the stand for truth that it has made for many years. And this group is also very special in a different way as well to Abby and I more recently, because you do support us in the work, not only in the current work at North Bibb, but you also supported me in the work that I did in Charlottesville, and very much appreciate that. You are involved in that work, and I hope you realize that. That is important work. We are involved in many things at North Bibb right now, about to embark on many new ones at the beginning of the year, to get out into the community, doing some public readings and hopefully leading to further studies and so forth, and so that is very much appreciated. We are going to be looking, as I've already mentioned, at the book of Ecclesiastes. And this is a book that, if you leave out the last few passages of this book, this is a really dark, grim, depressing book in so many ways. It's incredibly pessimistic, it's jaded, it's dark, if we leave out a critical theme. And we'll get to that towards the end of the lesson. It is a book that offers a lot of sympathy to the person who says, this is a miserable, awful, good-for-nothing world that's broken and nothing good can come of it. Solomon says, you're right. You're absolutely right. He spends the majority of the book talking about the worthlessness of the world and what it brings to the table, but by the time we reach the end of the book, he offers up something else, and he offers up wisdom throughout the book, and saying, I've searched for all of this worldly wisdom, but by the time we reach the end of the book, he says, but there is another type of wisdom that's so much better than what this world has to offer. It brings hope, it brings meaning, it brings purpose into our lives. And so we want to talk about some of those things this evening. You look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and in verse 13, Solomon says here, and I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised. If you have, I think it's the English Standard Version, renders that, instead of a burdensome task, an unhappy business. And that's maybe a pretty good summation of the book as a whole, in what Solomon is putting forward in talking about this world. All that Solomon looks at, all that is around him, he observes that it is not great. In fact, it's not great at all. And not only that, it's been broken for a long time, for a very long time. And maybe you don't think that. Maybe you don't think the world is so bad. Maybe your life is not as bad as others, and you look on others and saying, oh, they just need to buck up, right? Well, by the time we reach the end of Ecclesiastes, if you have any proverbial bubble, Solomon is going to pop quite a few of those. He's going to say it's not all sunshine, daisies, rainbows, and unicorns as much as you thought it was. And he's going to lay it out. He's literally going to bring us down to earth and show us just how bad it is. Tell us what life is like for those under the sun. So, the first thing that we want to observe, and that Solomon observes, is that this world is broken. It is broken. And it's not that things are getting bad, but in reality, the world has been mangled since Genesis 3. Since nearly the very beginning, things have been broken. They've been messed up. The world has nearly always been full of of miserable, mean, miserly, prideful people who want to do the most horrible things. And there have been countless wars, many conflicts since nearly the very beginning. In Ecclesiastes chapter 1, if you're still there in that same chapter, looking back now at verse 3, Solomon puts forward here, "What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun?" This is perhaps even a hearkening back to the curse that was laid on man in the garden, right? The work that we as mankind do, that we do, we now do hard labor, right? We sweat, there's grime, there's dirt, it's hard, it's difficult. And it wasn't that way before sin entered the world. It was perfect. But now man has sinned, and so things are different, things are broken. So there's more frustration with less payoff. Still some payoff, maybe not all the types of frustrations all of the time, but it's there. And we think about this in terms of planting a garden. When you plant a garden, do you plow and plant once and harvest once, and it's just going to be like that every time? You're never going to have to plow. You're never going to have to plant again. No, you have to put in the work every year, don't you? And you may even have to move fields. You may have to refertilize that soil. There's a lot that goes into that. So we understand that. One of the things, and Abby knows what I'm about to say because I use it so much in so many different lessons. I don't know if you would call us newlyweds still. We've been married over a year, but we've talked about that with some and say, no, you got to reach the 2-year mark. No, it's the 5-year mark. And some say, oh, you'll never get there. And I'm like, I don't know about that. But regardless, we've found that there are certain things that we both have a distaste for, and one of those is laundry. We do not like laundry, and I'm seeing some nods in the audience. There's others that share that same disdain. Why? Because you have to do it, seems like nearly every day, right? At least every week, especially if you have a large family. It's always going. It seems like the laundry's never being put up. It's always folded. It's just a vicious process, day in and day out. In our little bubble of America, the United States of America, it can be very easy for us to not appreciate some of the hard things that others have had to experience. I've heard my grandparents talk about how they grew up, great-grandparents, those of you who are blessed to have known your great-grandparents and so forth. We today, we are so blessed, so blessed. And I mean, you think about the times that these people lived in under these conditions, thousands of years ago, what they didn't have, and yet they still served the Lord. But Solomon, like so many of the other books, he pulls back the curtain and he says, you think it's so good? Let me show you what it's really like. Again, many in the audience know me. They know my personality. They know my likes, my dislikes. I am what you might call, I guess they're still calling it this, a nerd or a geek, right? So I enjoy a lot of nerdy things, a lot of geeky things, and I think this is a film that most would know, The Princess Bride. It's a very quotable movie, very quotable book if you've read the book, very similar to the movie. And there's one line in there when Buttercup and Wesley, they're talking and arguing with one another. And towards the end of that conversation, Wesley finally says, "Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says otherwise is selling you something." And we might amend that phrase for our purposes this evening in saying, "Life is vain, Highness." Solomon would put that forward and say, yes, life is vain. Life is vain. People will try to offer encouragement, words of admonition, and saying, "Oh, you need to just look for the silver lining, look for the rays of sunshine." And we understand what they're saying there. They are trying to be encouraging. However, oftentimes, especially when the world is offering that, that's only just a partial hope. It's only able to give just a little bit of hope, not to the fullest extent. Because what we'll find is that ray of hope or that silver lining, that's only going to get us so far. So whether it's on a Facebook wall, whether it's on the wall of a living room or a hallway, whatever wisdom it might be, this generic wisdom, it's really not going to get us very far. So we need to understand that. Well, second thing to consider this evening, we are going to become very, very frustrated by the thought that it doesn't have to be this way. You'll hear this thrown around in politics quite a bit, and we're about to hear it a lot more. You've probably already heard it as we're ramping up for the political season next year, that it doesn't have to be this way. I'm the one who can change things, this politician says. I'm the one that can get us back on track. And the solution they give is often worse than the problem itself, isn't it? It's almost always worse. They just mess things up because that's what man is best at doing so oftentimes. Even those in high positions of authority and power, they can observe that the world is a messed up, broken place. But the problem is they don't know how to fix it. They think they know, and they're proud of it. And they're going to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to do it. And by the end of it, it's going to be about the same, maybe a little better, maybe a lot worse. You come over to Ecclesiastes chapter 8. Chapter 8 in verse 16. Solomon says here, "When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night, then I saw all the work of God that a man cannot find out, the work that is done under the sun. For though a man labors to discover it, yet he will not find it. Moreover, though a wise man attempts to know it, he will not be able to find it." There are those in this world that say, I have the answer. I have the solution to the problem. Everyone look at me. I'm the one who can fix this. May I offer a warning, as Solomon does? Don't listen to that person. Or at least be very cautious of that person. If someone is saying, I'm the one who can fix this. Because oftentimes they are going to mess things up. And by the way, none of the ones saying that are nearly as wise as the one that we're reading from. And they're the ones saying, I have the solutions. And as we're going to continue to see through this lesson, Solomon is saying, I am the most wealthy, the most influential in the kingdom. Of course, he is the wisest. And yet, what does he say? He says, I can't do anything. I'm hopeless. I can't do this by myself. So there are those that might say, if we got all the smartest people in the room from every corner of the world, we form a type of committee. That's kind of a trigger word the last couple of weeks. I won't dig into that anymore. But we get a committee together. We're going to fix these problems. And Solomon says, no, I'll save you the trouble. Sit down. It ain't going to work. It's not going to work. Solomon, who was more capable of making big changes than any of us ever will, he felt helpless at everything that he saw around him. You back up to chapter 4 in verse 1. Then I returned and considered all the oppression that is done under the sun. So he sees this brokenness, the oppression, and look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressors, there is no power, but they have no comforter. Solomon, someone who could actually do something to fix the problem, or at least to help the problem, says, I can't fix this. I can't do it. I'm not I'm not able to fix this in the way that I want to, at least not permanently. He can temporarily fix it, but not permanently. You go over to chapter 2 in verse 18. Then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. He hates all of his labor because why? Because after he dies, somebody else can come along and he can mess it up. You think about this in terms of him being a king, and of course this is exactly what happened in the divided kingdom once his son Rehoboam took the throne, and then Jeroboam in the northern kingdom in Israel, is that all of the hard work that Solomon's father David had established, Solomon, at least at times, trying to keep that together, but straying at times as well, he says, what's the point? Because someone else is just going to come along and they're going to mess things up. So what's the point? Why am I working towards this? Solomon should crush this idea of the vision of the anointed, if you've heard that phrase thrown around at all. The vision of the anointed. The vision of the anointed is an idea that says, if we search hard and long enough, we can find that group of people that I was talking about, that committee. We can find that group of people, the best and the brightest, to take hold of all of the world's problems and to solve them, to improve the lives of others. Come back to chapter 1, verse 16. I communed with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. He who increases knowledge increases sorrow, says the wisest man to have ever walked the earth. Solomon again says, this is vanity. It's worthless. Solomon does offer up the idea here that at least earthly wisdom is better than earthly foolishness, but even that's only going to get you so far. There has to be something else. There has to be something else beyond that. So anyone that's walking around saying, we can fix all of these problems and we can have a heaven on earth, a utopia, again, be very careful about those people. Not just in politics, but in every facet of life. Be very careful. Final point on this major point. We do not need to be shocked in finding that this world is indeed a broken, bloody mess. It's nearly always been this way. And there's going to be people that say, and they've been saying it for so long, they say, we live in an age of injustice, of tyrants, some would say. In this country, they would say that. They would say that we live in such an age. Do you think the Christians that lived during the ages of Nero and Diocletian thought as much? I think they probably did. And yet we don't see them rising up in rebellion, do we? No, we see a much different response. Do you think that justice reigned in the time of Jeremiah? When Jeremiah was preaching to a people who refused to listen, and God told him as much. God told him, you are going to go to a people that do not want to hear this, but you go anyway. And it's those same people who tried to kill him multiple times. Yeah, we live in an age of injustice. Indeed. Oppression and injustice have always persisted at varying levels. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but it's always been there. And in this country, there are so many that say, we have freedom. And some would yell, no, we do not have freedom. Those freedoms have been taken away, they're continuing to be taken away from us, and so on and so forth. And we do live in a country of tyrants. And I'm not denying that none of that is taking place. But you go outside of this country. You go out into the Middle East right now, and you witness what's going on there. We do not have to wonder whether or not our home is going to be shelled at a moment's notice because of these forces that are fighting right outside our door in our backyard. We don't have to wonder where our next meal is coming from when we wake up every day. We are truly blessed. And yet, for all that, how long does it take us for us to observe that there are injustices, there are inconsistencies in leadership? They are there. They are there. There's wickedness, there's injustice there. And we don't have to look far in spite of the little bubble that we are in the United States of America, in the prosperity that we enjoy. Look no further for a time of prosperity and peace than the reign of King Solomon. This was the best time to live in Israel, bar none. And yet, what does Solomon say? There's still oppression. There's still oppression, and is it a little bit to where I can squelch it out and it's not going to really last very long? No, he says, I can't do anything about it. I've tried. He doesn't say I'm just dismissing the problem. He's saying I'm doing my best, and yet it is still prevailing. I can't conquer this, not by myself. People today, and they've always said, again, you can change the world. In fact, you are obligated to do so. And may I offer this? Amen to that. However, if Jesus Christ is not in the picture of that vision of changing the world, then it's going to be as worthless as everything else that people are trying to sell you. Absolutely, it will be. Because we by ourselves, we are not going to be able to change the world. We are not going to be able to change society. We're not going to be able to change culture. But we can bring the gospel to others. And we can change individuals through the power of the gospel. And that is so awesome. We cannot do it by ourselves. I said one final point a minute ago. Psyched you out there. Our life too is broken. It's not just that the rest of the world is broken and we ourselves are okay. No, we also are broken. You go over to chapter 2 in verse 4. Chapter 2 in verse 4. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. Someone might come to you and say, I'm a failure. You might think that of yourself. I'm a failure. And Solomon says, you're exactly right. Said, wow, that's what I needed to hear. No. But yet that's what Solomon says. And Solomon thinks that of himself. He says, I am a failure. The richest, wisest, most influential person in his day and age says, I am a failure. What's more dangerous is someone who comes to you and says, I don't have any problems. I'm not a failure. In fact, I'm something. In fact, I'm a lot of something. Again, be very careful of that person. That should remind us of the man over in Luke chapter 12, shouldn't it? Luke chapter 12 and verse 19, where he says, I've lived a good life. I'm going to build bigger barns. I'm going to put more stuff in those barns. And so he says to himself, rest, eat, drink, and be merry. And of course, we know the end of that man. That person is truly a failure, one who doesn't think they are, one who doesn't think that their life is broken. Solomon accomplished more than any of us can ever dream of accomplishing. He accomplished more than anyone ever will in many ways. And what is his evaluation of his accomplishments? The Queen of Sheba, when she comes to Solomon and looks at all that he's accrued, all that he's stored up for himself, her jaw drops to the ground. And she said, I was not told the half of it. What I did hear, I believed, it's true, but I didn't even hear the half of it. And yet Solomon says, I am a failure. So you can point to all of the stuff that you've accrued. You can point to maybe some of the letters that are before your name. You can point to the legacy that you seek to leave behind. But one day, as Solomon puts forward, you're going to die, and all of that stuff is going to be left to someone else who more than likely is not going to treat it with the same amount of respect and notoriety as you did. They're going to think it's junk, probably. All of those things are going to be forgotten. Now, I could end the lesson here, but that's not where the story ends. Fortunately for us, fortunately for Solomon. It would be incredibly depressing if that's where the book ended, if that's where the message ended, but it's not. So, you take away every bubble, every ray of sunshine, every silver lining, and when the dust settles, what are we left with? What's left? We're going to find that God is indeed our only hope. Truly. He's the answer to the question that Solomon has been asking since chapter 1. In chapter 1, in verse 15, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. Some translations offer this verse up as a question, actually, in saying, who can make something crooked straight except for God? God is the only one who can do this. Only God can permanently, and that's the key, permanently make something that was crooked straight again, make it whole again. Again, going to what Solomon is illustrating here, the world does offer up good things. And Solomon says, okay, but you take that away, and what do you have? Because, yes, it's a good thing, but it's not going to last. So what do you have? And Solomon says, you have hopelessness, you have nothing except for here. This brings meaning and purpose and fulfillment. With God, the smallest of things, even the smallest of things, can become hopeful. When we see this world is broken, every gift, every good gift, every small gift, every large gift is treasured with more gratitude. So now that God is in the picture, I can enjoy some of the same blessings that Solomon had been chasing after. You go over to chapter 2 in verse 24. Nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. Okay, so this is something good. This is from God. This is something that we can enjoy, but it is from the hand of God, and so we have to see it as such, to put it in that context, don't we? Otherwise, those small things in life, they're only things that we're going to be holding on to for a little bit, and it's like grasping for the wind. We're never going to be able to truly take hold of those things, and they're not going to last. Another way to frame it up, we do not deserve the simple pleasures of life. We're in a season of the year right now where there's a lot of good food to go around, isn't there? With all of the many family gatherings that we go to, we are, so many of us, blessed in that way. Have you ever thought about this? God could have created the food that we eat in any way that He wanted to. He could have made it bland. He could have made it like gravel in our mouths, and we would be deserving of that. And yet, He made it good. Even after the fall in the garden, it is still good. And so if we take God out of the picture, yeah, food's good, but as soon as we eat it, what are we looking forward to after that? We're looking forward to the next meal, and the next meal, and the next meal. And it's just that vicious cycle again, isn't it? But you bring God into the picture, and suddenly, wow, I view this in a new light. Now I have somewhere to point that gratitude in saying, yes, this food is good. Who gave this food? Yes, it's God. And He provides for me each day. And that is such a blessing. You think about if you're one like me where you enjoy being outdoors and hiking and all of those things. I remember when a few years ago my family and I, we went out to the Grand Canyon for the first time, and you witness that spectacle and you see that for the first time, and it is awe-inspiring. Again, God could have made the world any way that He wanted to, and He made that for us, the Grand Canyon and otherwise. He made that for us to look at that and to say, yeah, I see God in that. I see a whole lot of God in that. And that's not even the beginning of His power and His goodness and His might. So yes, I will gladly serve Him. I will gladly serve Him. Next point here. When God enters the picture, we are now freed from burdens that we ourselves are not capable of carrying. You go over to chapter 3, look at verse 12 here. Chapter 3 and verse 12. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. This comes on the heels, these two verses, comes on the heels of that laundry list of there's a time for this and a time for that, and so on and so forth. And the idea is that this is how life is. This is how life is. You can't have the good without the bad, right? There's always going to be that mixture. So you can't take away the mourning or the wars or the conflict or the destruction just because it's bad and just because you don't like it. It's still going to be there. But what we can do is verse 12. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives. That's what we can do. That's what we're called to do. So instead of trying to stick it to the man, trying to one-up someone, trying to get what's yours, you do good. You be kind. Chapter 12 and verse 13, the culmination of everything that Solomon has been talking about, and probably the most famous verse out of this book, and I'm sure you know it, that we are to fear God and keep His commandments. This is the whole of man. This is what it's all about. This is what brings purpose. This is what brings that meaning, and does not leave us hopeless and feeling worthless. So what are we here for? That is what we're here for. Someone might come along and say, that's not enough. It can't just be that. Yes, it can. And if they're saying that, they do not even begin to appreciate what Solomon is saying here. Do you realize who we're serving? Look around. Look around. This is a blessing indeed. Ephesians 3 and verse 19 says, "Be filled with all the fullness of God." So when we fear God and we keep His commandments, we find that His goodness, His righteousness, it is overflowing. And it is continuously overflowing. Again, when God enters the picture, it frees us up from worrying about every little thing that people might say about us, behind our backs. You go over to chapter 7. Chapter 7 in verse 21. "Also, do not take to heart everything people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. For many times also your own heart has known that even you have cursed others." Even you've done this. I very much enjoy history. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say. And there's several authors that I enjoy reading. David McCullough is one of those. Some of you might have heard of him, read him. There was a TV show on several years ago, John Adams, based upon the book that he wrote many years ago. And it chronicles the life of our second president. And you'll know, if you know the history of John Adams, that he was very good friends, at least for parts of his life, with Thomas Jefferson. However, during their political reigns, they were not very friendly at all to one another. They were very vicious towards one another. And in one publication, Thomas Jefferson posted this to say against John Adams. "John Adams is a blind, bald, crippled, toothless man who is a hideous, hermaphroditic character with neither the force and fitness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman." Aren't you glad that no one does that to each other today? No one speaks in such vitriolic ways. No, what do you have in your pocket right now? You can do that even quicker than Mr. Jefferson did. He didn't have to wait for the newspaper to go out the next day. We can write whatever we want within just a few seconds and not think a second about it. What Solomon says to that is, hold on. You think you know what's right here. Take a second, think about what you're doing, and keep your mouth shut. Because in fact, it may very well be that someone has said those same things about you. You've said those things about others. And there may even be some truth into what maybe you're wanting to respond to, but Solomon says, yet still, keep quiet. Don't say anything about it. Don't put more fuel on this fire. It's not going to help. It's not going to help. As much as depends on me, be at peace with all men. That is what we should be about as Christians, as saints, as disciples. We are pressing on towards a world that does not call for anything that the world calls for. And so we are to be different. We are to be, as saints, set apart, different, holy. That is who we are. Final point, I promise. I'm telling the truth this time. God is even capable of bringing beauty out of the mess that we see all around us, and that has been there for a long, long time. You go back again to chapter 3. Chapter 3, and let's actually back up to verse 9 here. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are able to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives. Beautiful in its time. That's the same word that Solomon uses here, the same word for God saw, and it was good. It's the same word for when Moses' mother looked on him and she saw that it was a beautiful child. It's the same word used there. God can take what is so messed up, what is so mangled and broken, and He can turn it into something quite beautiful. That's how we have to frame things up. That's how Solomon frames it up for us here. Romans chapter 8 and verse 28 tells us, we know that all things work together for good to those that love God, those who are the called according to His purpose. If you love the Lord, then the tragedy that you witness around you, you can see that with light. You can see that with a new perspective, with goodness. Even in the extreme, we think about, there's so many examples we could go to in Scripture, but of course, maybe the one that comes into our minds first, Job. Job experienced tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. And by the end of that, he had not lost his faith. He stumbled a few times. He almost slipped, but God told him, you step back. You're at a place. And he saw that. But he saw the goodness of God. Paul, the Apostle Paul, when he came to truly know God, to see Him for who He truly was, he now finds a silver lining in his past life, in the life that he was so ashamed of. Paul could look at his own life, the filth that it was, and the shame that it was, and he could observe God's grace in action, and we can as well. And we draw so many great examples from him today in saying that if Paul can be forgiven, yes, I too can be forgiven, no matter how messed up I think I am, because yes, I am a failure, but there's a way to overcome that. So because we see God, we can take on any of the darkness of this world. Anything that the devil throws our way, we can meet it head on as long as Christ is right beside us and He is leading us into battle. So we count it all joy when trials come, when a thorn in the flesh comes, as it did for Paul, and we go forward. Now, take a step back to the beginning of the lesson. With God out of the picture, in the midst of tragedy, how can someone go on? People do. I don't know how they do. They do it. They do stumble. There's no other way to look at it than that. The whole book, Solomon is telling us that the world is a rotten place. There is no hope unless we see God. God is the only reason that it's not more rotten. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., there's many great museums there that I'm not going to go in detail about. But there is one in particular that I do think that if you ever have the chance to go and you've never been, you should go, but you'll never have to go again, and that's the Holocaust Museum. The Holocaust Museum is, of course, one that chronicles the evils that were done against the Jews and many other groups by the Nazi Party. And that museum, those images stay in your mind forever. They don't leave you. And I can remember towards the very end of the exhibits, there's all of these plaques and videos and audio and so forth talking about, if we remember this, let us endeavor to never let this happen again. That was in the 1940s. If you just do a quick Google search, you'll find just how many genocides, how many wars, how many brutal, horrible things have happened since that time. It's not gotten any better. The human race Yeah, we claim to remember, but we don't actually do anything about it. And so it's broken in that way. We cannot put our faith in humanity because they're not going to be the ones to fix it. Again, who's the one that does? Who's the one that brings meaning, that brings purpose, that brings life, eternal life? It is God, and it's through Jesus Christ, His Son, and He has died for us. And if He only died for us, that would be sad indeed, but He was raised. And so we have hope, and that's how we have hope. If you're here this evening, perhaps you feel that you have no hope in your life. You're at the end of your rope. You don't know what to do. Jesus says, come. I can make you whole. If you are not in the body of Christ, you have not been baptized for the remission of your sins, you can do that this very evening. If you have been baptized, you are in the body of Christ, but perhaps you've strayed, you've begun to grasp onto the things of the world, come back. There are so many here that would be so willing to help you, and may we all take this lesson through our lives, to reflect on this, to know that the world is indeed broken, but God and Christ, they are the ones that make things whole. If you have a need this evening, won't you come as we stand and as we sing?